Hello and welcome to the programme. Now, is it possible to return Ukrainian political prisoners of the Kremlin to Ukraine, and what sort of legal mechanisms exist for this to happen? Joining us in the studio today is Serhiy Petukhov. He is the Deputy Minister of Justice for European Integration. Serhiy, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to ask you about this legal framework for returning Ukrainian political prisoners who are in Russia. Firstly, can you start off by describing what is a political prisoner and how that sort of differs from, say, prisoners of war or prisoners of conscience?
Now, political prisoner is someone who's been taken hostage by a state, pretty much, and is arrested for something that he has never committed, or the penalty imposed is disproportionate to whatever crime or misdemeanor he might have committed. So in the first place, of course, I mean, in case of a political prisoner, someone who is detained for no reason, it should have been the Russian court system that should have set them free, because they've not committed the crimes they're accused of. Of course, in Russia, the courts are not independent.
Well,
so,
that proves that they're not independent.
And actually, when the courts are not independent, that's when you have political prisoners, usually. And in this situation, of course, I mean, there's limited ways of what you can do. Legally speaking, Russia is still a member of Council of Europe, so all of the political prisoners have an option to apply to the European Court of Human Rights, which can review the decision of the Russian courts or make an order for them to stop or release someone or give medical help if that is denied. Unfortunately, Russia in recent years has changed their constitution to allow the Supreme Court of Russia to disregard the cases or decisions of the European Court of Human Rights, which, in their opinion, run contrary to the Russian constitution. And already the Russian authorities made use of this provision, and effectively they disregard the decisions of Strasbourg Court, which they don't like. Therefore, in the situation, what we have is that, you know, we have the political ways of dealing with the situation. So the situation with the political prisoners in Russia is brought to the attention of the Council of Europe, European Union, United Nations, and other organizations in which Russia is a party, where they press and make the statements and make decisions, and possibly also may decide to adopt sanctions against Russia for this blunt violation of human rights.
So this international pressure is really important then?
Of course it is. Yeah. We are still going, you know, one thing is this political pressure, which is important. We're still using the legal ways. We're going to the European Court of Human Rights. We submitted a case to the United Nations International Court of Justice for the racial discrimination that happens in Crimea against Crimean Tatars and Ukrainian. So we are taking all the possible ways to show the world and Russia that no one can violate, you know, massively violate human rights of Ukrainians and go unpunished.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and you said it yourself as well, that the Russian courts are very biased and not fair. There's no fair trial. Many of these political prisoners have not had a fair trial at all, and there's been pseudo-evidence and that sort of thing. So how effective are these international bodies such as the United Nations and the European Union at actually influencing Russia? I mean, even just a few days ago, I saw a letter that was written by 3 MEPs, I believe, calling for the release of Roman Shenko.
Now, the situation with Ukrainian political prisoners is not unique in Russia. The Russian courts deal this in the same way with the leaders of the Russian opposition, with independent journalists, something that is not related to Ukraine. So this is just a trend that has been happening in the Russian legal system throughout the last decade, where they get more and more authoritarian. So the way to deal with that is, of course, I mean, there is no direct way to force Russia to do something. There is no direct way to stop the military aggression, unfortunately. However, if you manage to unite international community behind you, you can be effective in pressuring regimes like Russia and some other rogue regimes in the world.
Yeah. Has this happened before, actually? I'm trying to think of some cases before where there's been a lot of pressure on one country and eventually...
There has been many situations, some of them more successful, others less, but there has never been a situation where a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, a nation which by definition should be promoting peace and security around the world, has been bluntly violating the international law in the following manner, as the Russia does.
This is what Mr. Poroshenko actually said when he was in America just a few weeks ago.
Therefore, of course, it's much more complicated to deal with the states of the size of Russia. Usually when you see the sanctions, you think of North Korea or Iran, states that were under the sanctions regime for decades, and rightly so. With Russia, it's much more complicated. Russia can block any decision of the Security Council of the United Nations. However, we do believe that if you have the right, if you know that you're right, and you have the international law behind you, sooner or later, you are able to enforce that even on the biggest and most powerful states like Russia.
Yeah, and you work in the Justice Ministry of Ukraine, and you work alongside other different bodies within the state structure. For example, the Ukrainian ombudsman who works in Russia and who works with the Russian ombudsman. And many people don't actually know that this exchange is happening, and it seems to be relatively effective. So what's your opinion on this?
It is, because she has a different mandate. So she has this humanitarian mandate. She's not bound by the international conventions as such and regulations. If both, ombudspersons on Russian and Ukrainian sides can agree on certain things and get this through their state machine, some things can happen. There has been some limited cooperation in case of Crimea. Ukrainian ombudsperson had a chance to go to Crimea and visit just some political prisoners on a limited time frame in the specific places where they were detained. We see that as already a success.
Well,
in exchange, the Russian ombudsperson could visit the Russians detained in Ukraine, in Mykolaiv. And I think we are much more open to that. Whenever we have Russian citizens detained, we're always open for the Russian authorities to visit them and to know their fate and to be present at their trials and to know what they're accused of. So we hope that, the ombudsperson would, through her humanitarian mandate, have more access to Ukrainian nationals, even if she can get them out. Just by bringing attention to them, just by being able to visit them, she already improves their situation.
Well, that's very important as well. Firstly, because the prisoners feel as if they're not alone. They feel that they haven't been left by their country.
Absolutely, but not only that. We do know that after those visits, the Russian guards, the other inmates and generally the administration in Russian prisons, they treat them differently. They know that there's attention to them. There's much better treatment. They get, much better conditions. It becomes even easier for them just to survive, these years of trials, of detention.
And not just that, sometimes forced labor as well. In some cases, not all.
Could be. Well, we mostly hear about the cases of forced labor of the prisoners on the occupied parts of Donbass.
Yes, yeah.
That's where it is widespread, according to the reports of the international organizations. And of course, this is a very, very, very bad situation. We would want to have those people, Ukrainian nationals, on our territory. Unfortunately, there has been only several exchanges of the prisoners, and for some reason, occupational authorities are just unwilling. So do you have some sort
of strategy then, where the Justice Ministry and the Ombudsman and perhaps different organisations, they work together?
Well, of course, we are well coordinated. We are well coordinated within the government. We all work together.
Yeah.
We do know that everybody has his or her own responsibility. So we are acting under the international agreements to which the Russia is party, where they are obliged to respond to our requests and have to provide information. And also we're dealing with the Strasbourg Court, European Court of Human Rights, whereas a Ministry of Foreign Affairs has direct access through the consular staff to our people on the Russian territory.
So it's different channels then, but everyone's working for the same goals.
And they're also talking on the diplomatic level, and some things are better resolved, quietly on the diplomatic level. So that's the option that we also want to keep open for us. And then the ombudsperson has a different mandate. She's not bound by any agreement as such. Whenever there's a free will on the other side, she can move certain things, or she can make situation conditions better to our prisoners.
I see. And I want to talk about one specific case about Roman Sushenko, the journalist, Ukrainian journalist who worked for Ukrinform in Paris and then was arrested a year ago in Moscow when he says he was off to see his family. Do you have any news on that? What sort of chances are there that he could be released, if any? And how is that case going to proceed in the future?
Now, that is, this case is an example of a very unfortunate Russian policy of just simply detaining Ukrainian nationals and accusing them of just random crimes that they might think that they would want to use against Ukraine as a state. That's why our Ministry of Foreign Affairs actually advises against all travels to Russia, because we've seen this repeatedly happening either in occupied Crimea or in Russia itself. I mean, in this situation, of course, I mean, the process in the Russian courts is still ongoing, and there is no influence that we can have on these procedures. We are bringing attention of the international community to his situation, to his case. There is a specific attention attached to him because he's a journalist, so we do have the support of the World and European Organization of Journalists. They, of course, feel, the connection to his colleague.
Yeah, of course.
Everybody can be in his shoes. So, I mean, Russia should really understand that this policy of just targeting Ukrainian nationals and accusing them of random crimes is really not effective, that it brings more pain and loss to the state than any benefit or propaganda benefit that they might have domestically. And that is, what we're looking at. We want to make it unbearable for him, because otherwise they just keep picking people for no reasons, using them for the propaganda domestically.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's not just him, but we have Oleksandr and Oleksandr Korchenko as well. And some of these prisoners have been forced to take Russian citizenship. How does that legally affect your work that you can do at the Ukrainian Justice Ministry?
There's a problem with the occupied Crimea because Russia, lives in a parallel reality. They, of course, do not recognize their aggression and occupation of Crimea, something that is recognized internationally. They do not want to apply the Geneva Conventions to the occupied territory. They deny all of the calls from the international community, from the human rights monitoring body, to open their borders, to let the international monitors to Crimea to at least see what's going on. They are denying the application of international humanitarian law and obligations on the Geneva Conventions to Crimea. Therefore, of course, I mean, imposing automatic imposition of nationality on the occupied territory is illegal. Absolutely, that's prohibited. That should not have been happening. However, because they ignore the whole situation, they present it as if that was a free choice. They are just not even responding to these claims. They're just not responding to any legal claim or suggestion for monitoring, negotiations, or seeking this way out of it.
Okay, well, that was very interesting. Thank you so much for coming into our studio, and hopefully we'll have some positive news sometime soon about Roman Serhiy and the other political prisoners. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Serhiy Petukhov. He's the Deputy Minister of Justice for European Integration. You're watching UATV.